Hey everybody, it's Rashed. Today I want to talk to you about AI-assisted coding. Sometimes people call it vibe coding. I tend not to like thinking about it as vibe coding because I feel a little bit more involved than just kind of a wish and a prayer. But a lot of times people get their first coding experience, AI-assisted coding experience on relatively small projects that are entirely self-contained within a session or two. And the results are usually pretty impressive. What you can actually put out with very minimal involvement usually is going to be a functional working prototype of some idea that you had. And I think that's great. But what happens when you try to go into a slightly more advanced type of project where there's a lot more code is some of the techniques that you maybe develop early on start to break down. So I wanted to share with you like how I do it, how I work with AI to develop code on larger code bases. Obviously, I can't share the Fabrics AI source code with you, so I'm going to use one of my personal projects, Busily, to demonstrate how it works. Basically, I got a request from a customer to implement a new feature in Busily, and it's a basically feature that's it's a feature to implement some payroll type of stuff for some of the workers on a project, but that's neither here nor there. The key part is that Busily is a code base of about 40,000 lines of code. So it's not small, it's not huge, but it's not small. And we're going to be integrating a completely new feature into the product. And we're going to do it with AI. So I'm going to show you how I do that, how I manage to keep the AI on track with a larger code base where there's no way that it can load the entire thing into its context window. I'll pick up a few tricks and along the way. By no means is this the only way to work with AI on large projects. It's just a technique that I've kind of developed and gotten used to, and it's producing some fairly good results for me. So I'll be sharing that with you right here. So let's get going. All right. So the key thing to understand here is that there is a lot of code here. I'm only going to show you some of it, but you can kind of see modules, lots of Python modules, and then a few front end kind of JavaScript modules, not to mention all of the HTML stuff. There's actually quite a bit of stuff going on here. But what I've done, the central concept that helps me govern this using AI-assisted coding is the fact that at the same time as I'm managing my code, I'm also managing documentation. So if you look right here, I've actually got documentation, and it starts with this README file. Let me close that and show you what that looks like. Generated this README file at the beginning that gives you kind of a quick tour of the architecture, where everything is, how it's laid out, what the patterns are, and where they're documented. There's a kind of this document that is the index to all of the different things that are implemented. You can see the way that that's done. So if I just show you my docs directory, this is the README file that we were just looking at. And there's some subdirectories for architecture, features, guides, and modules. I've developed these with my AI coding assistant while writing the code. And you're about to see an example of that documentation being created and maintained for the purposes this thing. So I have this for the back end. I also have the same thing for the front end, where it's also documented. I have a README for that. And I have, some key parts of the front end are documented in their own pages. And then the idea is not only do I maintain some set of docs, but I use the docs to help the AI understand what's going on and stay consistent and stay on task. So my preferred coding assistant is Claude Code. So we just start Claude Code here in the terminal. And I'm just going to say, hi, Claude. We're about to implement a new feature in this project. Before we get started, please review the documentation under Docs. Give yourself a good sense of the code base. Let me know if you have any questions, and we will proceed. So just give it a little bit of a nudge here to go and look at the docs. It's going to read the docs, and it's going to dig down into any code that it feels that it needs. And then into its context window will be some key information about how the code is structured. All right. So then I have to read this. I want to make sure that Claude has understood uh, my code. Yes, it's a multi-tenant time tracking and invoicing system. Yes, this looks good. We're going to ignore the macOS app for now. Yes, this looks good. All right. Yes, this is a very, very important thing. That's a personal preference of mine. I don't like fallbacks that are hard coded. I like that when things are unexpected, I like errors because then I want to be able to fix those problems. And by default, you have to be careful because these coding models will put Band-Aid on this, and they'll hide failures with hard-coded defaults, and then you'll be like, huh, how come this works? It shouldn't work. Yeah. So you have to be pretty on top of it. All right, so I'm satisfied that Claude understands my code, and so now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the feature. We are about to start a discussion, the purpose of which is to design a new feature. We will not begin code implementation until my explicit instructions to do so. I need you to keep the existing architecture in mind and help me architect this in a way that is consistent with how things are done, sticks to the core principles of simplicity, economy, and code reuse. The feature in question is the ability for an admin for any given workspace to not only keep track of the work that a worker has done on a project, but also keep track of how much that worker needs to be paid for this work. This leverages the billable items entries that the worker has entered for themselves, but starts to track a new dimension, which is compensation. Maybe we can categorize all the new concerns that this will come into play as payroll or some other term that you can suggest for this that fits within the schema that we have. Some additional constraints. For any given worker, we need to be able to define a compensation rate. I think the worker should have a default compensation rate, default compensation currency, compensation schedule. On a per project basis, I may want to override some of these. Help me think through this. I want to leverage custom currencies and compensation so that we have flexible compensation mechanisms. Sometimes workers are compensated in equity, for example. I would create a custom currency for that equity, and the worker gets paid in that. We have to be able to track whether or not we have paid our workers and how much our workers are owed. We should also probably have some way to flag potential duplicate timesheets, but let's save that for later. Does this make sense to you? Can you evaluate the above in context and tell me at a high level what you think we would need to do? All right. So we've defined in broad strokes what the problem is. We're not ready to code. We're still kind of in a design session here, and I'm using Claude as a thinking partner, as a brainstorming partner. And the goal of this brainstorming session is not to produce code. The goal of this brainstorming session is going to be to produce a document, a master document. And we're going to do this step by step. So this is the very first step. And I'm now asking Claude, what do you think? What can you contribute to this discussion? So it's going to think about it and it's going to come back to me. All right. So here's what it came back with. So it's going to leverage my existing billable items. This is good. Mirror the client billing pattern. The existing architecture has billable items, invoices, payments from client. We'll add billable items, payroll statement, payment to worker. Okay, this is going to have to pay attention to this one because it's looking like it wants to use the payment model for both clients and workers. We're going to have to take a closer look and make sure that actually works. Our compensation rate architecture, I think we need a layered approach, user level, default compensation rate, default compensation currency, compensation schedule, um, project level. This is basically telling me that my my user project, this is going to be a schema change in the database, which I would rather avoid, but might not be avoidable. I don't think that we need a new model for this. Should we extend user project for compensation or create a separate user project compensation model? Okay, good. So it picked up on this. I was hesitating on extending user project. We can have a talk about that. Currency scope. Should currencies be tenant specific, allowing custom equity currencies per tenant or global? This is showing a misunderstanding. Perfect. See, it's asking this question. I was going to mention the restrictions here. Yeah. Okay. So let's try to drill down a little bit. So we're gonna think through. All right. So we're gonna go start with this one. So here I'm just asking follow-up questions or making some follow-up observations, drilling down, trying to refine the plan, making it think through, challenging it, having it challenge me, so the plan gets better. Okay. So what you're watching here is a very, very sped up video of me going through um, Claude getting started on trying to negotiate with me about what the understandings of the architecture are going to be. We're not anywhere close to getting started yet. We're still talking about my specification that I gave to Claude. It's coming back to me with a proposal, some high level plan. I'm very, very carefully reviewing that plan. I'm looking through, eyeballing things, and I'm giving it some feedback on its plan. So I'm commenting on it. I'm responding to some of the questions that it's asked me. I prompted it to ask me questions. That's really important to do. If you don't prompt it to ask you questions, it'll just proceed with full confidence. But if you prompt it to ask you questions, it'll usually come up with some pretty good ones. So I'm helping Claude get some further understanding of what it was that I meant with my initial specification for the project. I'm going through point by point, trying to answer some of its concerns. I'm picking up on things that I'm seeing that are looking slightly off, and we're having a conversation about that. It comes back with results. Again, I'm reviewing those results very carefully. It looks like I'm doing it real quick here because I'm fast forwarding, but I'm actually spending quite a bit of time looking at it very carefully, and I'm answering again some questions that it's asking me. So we're getting at this point, what we're doing is we're filling up the context, right? So we're still having a single conversation from Claude's perspective. You can see on the bottom right that my context window is about 61% full. I'm getting close to the end of what Claude can handle all at once, but so far everything we've discussed is inside of its memory. I found a few issues with what it was doing. I'm questioning some of its approaches. I'm second guessing some of my own architectural decisions at this point. So even some of the original spec that I gave, after seeing it, some of it play out, I'm rethinking it. So here I'm making some final decisions, and this is where I'm prompting now Claude to generate the master document. This is where I am actually asking for the document that's going to guide the development. So you can see I'm saying, what I need you to do is create a high-level implementation plan, focus mostly on the requirements, describing the features we're trying to build in, the integration points, the architectural decisions we have made, and any implementation specifics that are required by the in order to maintain and adhere to existing code patterns. I really hate code drift, and I really wanted to stick to the patterns and to do things the way that things have been done. So your high-level implementation plan should not be overly prescriptive when it comes to code. A lot of times Claude will tend to just, instead of writing a document, it starts to write the code and says, that's my document. That's not a good thing to do. So anyway, here is the document that it created. I'm just scrolling through it. I'm giving it a quick review. It actually has a nice structure. It's breaking down all of the high level requirements, what I'm asking for it to do. It's highlighting some of the styling and design requirements that I put in there. Some of my priorities about simplicity and code reuse and maintainability. I asked it to document integration points, everything that it's going to need to touch, and it's doing a pretty comprehensive and good job. That's going to help later so that we don't leave anything out. And then there is a phased plan of implementation where we can go step by step. And from this plan, we're going to generate a checklist. And I will show you a more cleaned up version of this document once it's completed here. All right. So we have 34% of our context remaining. So we're starting to run low on context, but within a single context window, we've been able to plan this entire project, work through design stuff, uh, you know, go down certain rat holes to try to understand where things might break. Claude and I have interacted about how things work together and what some of the design implications of the decisions that we're making are going to be. And we've gotten to a place where I feel that the plan is solid. We haven't written a single line of code yet, but we actually understand the plan right now. And we have actually a document that outlines this plan, and is going to be read by the coding assistant in the next session when we're trying to actually implement this. And it discusses everywhere that has to change. It lays out a clear plan of, what's going to be implemented in what order. Here's a checklist that the AI is going to use to track its own progress. This is what's going to keep the project on track. And you'll notice that at the very end here, we've got a step to update the documentation so that by the time we're finished with all of this, we will have a newly updated set of documents that talks about everything we've implemented here, so that the next time we start a project, it's actually going to be aware of the things that we just finished. So I'm going to get started implementing this project. And I'm going to use this as a template and as a guide for doing that. There'll probably be some additional interaction cycles between myself and Claude as we go, where I'm going to try to course correct. I'm going to be watching very carefully to see how it's implementing things and making sure to keep things on track. But this is really, really going to help maintain that consistency. And it's going to help prevent things like new endpoints being created in my API that duplicate functionality that already exists, and all sorts of things like that that tend to happen a lot with AI coding assistants. So we're going to get started. At the end, once the AI feels that it's actually implemented all of the features of this plan, we're going to go back and we're going to have it examine all of the code that it wrote and compare it to this plan and grade itself on implementation. We're going to ask it, did you actually successfully implement the plan that we had laid out? And oftentimes it'll find things that it missed or things that it did wrong. So that'll be interesting. We'll look at that. So I'm going to be fast forwarding through the next section a little bit. I'll pause it and I'll slow down for the parts where something interesting is happening, but you'll get a sense of how that goes. So, all right, here we go. And right off the bat, there's a problem. So I noticed that the code that it was generating was actually, making some wasteful use of the code. It was not. It was replicating some code that already existed somewhere else. So I asked it to correct that. It corrected that, and I'm speeding massively through the coding session here. There was actually quite a few issues that came up in the beginning. We discussed them, we talked about them, we turned them around, we fixed them until things got to be just so. Oftentimes, the beginning of the project is a little bit rocky. We got through it though. We got through it, and it was mostly sticking to the plan. Yeah, phase one took a little bit of time, but we got through it. All right. So we've gotten past phase one. We have some of the major kind of like building blocks put into the back end. We're not quite ready to run our first bunch of tests yet, but I'm feeling pretty good about where we are. We caught a few architectural gaps already in our implementation, and I think a lot of these gaps are going to come up in the beginning, and as we get going, it'll be less. So it's going to speed up until we get to the testing and then run into all the bugs. But for now, we're making good progress, and we've saved that progress to our plan, and we're going to be moving on to the next. So let's get started with that. So the next thing that happened is I noticed while I was reviewing this little piece of code that it was not doing the access control properly. So I called it out on that, saying you're not doing it. It was actually missing the fact that there was supposed to that the system has the concept of a super user and an admin. It seemed to have forgotten that, which told me that it skipped reading that documentation. So I called it out on it. I wanted to see if it would be able to correct itself. It regenerated a new version of the code that accounted for this. But as you'll see in a second, the code that it came back with, when I started to review that, I was like, these patterns don't look right. This looks actually not the way that we normally enforce these kinds of access control restrictions in the code. I was like, nope, this AI is going off the rails. So it was time for a reset. And this is another point when having the documentation is just a godsend because I don't have to explain things from scratch. I don't have to go and tell it how to do all of this stuff. I can just tell it, look, stop what you're doing, which is what I'm doing right here. Stop what you're doing, go read the documentation, then go read the code that the documentation is talking about. Orient yourself around the code base, see how it's being done, and make sure that you do it the same in this code. And that's what I did here. And it finally was able to implement things properly with, relatively minor correction on my part. It was able to do this right. All right. So that's phase two completed. We caught some potentially big errors there, right? So it's extremely important to stay on top of things. And some of the problems that we encountered are problems that I frequently encountered when restarting a session. Because if you remember, in the very first session, we had the benefit of defining and laying out the plan. We saved it to a file, but inside the model's context was still the entire discussion that led up to the creation of that file. When we started session two, we basically started with a compacted context. I could have had it reread the documentation. That would have helped a little bit. It did have a compacted summary of the previous session, so it wasn't starting completely from scratch, but you do have to be careful at each of these sessions that you have, that you're giving the model the required context to be able to remember all of the things that you told it were going to be high priorities for implementation. In this case, it forgot about the importance of making sure that that we read the documentation, that we adhered to existing patterns. So it started to implement some of its own logic for gating access. And it missed a couple of important steps, and that's why for example, it didn't really understand that we had admins and super users, and a few things like that. That it's your responsibility to keep track of and to understand your code base, to understand your product, and you are a conductor. You may not be playing all the instruments, but it is your responsibility for all of that to come through and make a beautiful symphony. So it's important to remember that. So we're going to keep going here. We're almost ready for test. I'm going to have it generate at this point some front end documentation, and read and generate front end documentation so that we can actually implement the front end and do some testing. So, all right, let's get going with that. So this is how we're going to start. You say, please read the docs and front end docs. I want you to understand exactly how my front end is structured. Dig into any of the models if you need to. Look for patterns that can leverage and replicate for the implementation of the new payroll features. Then come back to me with a design proposal and propose changes to our implementation plan that incorporate some of this more specific understanding of the front end. So the idea is we've already got a sketch of a plan for doing the front end stuff. But we want to specifically modify that plan so that it's consistent with how we've been implementing the front end. I don't want my front end to break. I don't want all sorts of crazy, janky code to be put into it. I want it to be a continuation of the front end implementation that I've worked so hard to put together. So we're having it do some homework up front, and we'll get that kicked off. All right, here we go. Okay, so here's the plan he came up with. It's basically examined all of the documentation. It understands the structure and is proposing to augment that structure with new documents. These all look pretty good. It's going into some detail about how it's planning to implement some of the UI permissions. When I'm looking at these look pretty good. These look like pretty much how things are normally done. I'm trying to make sure that it's picking up on existing patterns and that it is sticking to them. When I look at this, it looks pretty good. Same thing with navigation. It looks like it's adding it to the right places in the sidebar. It's got a few things in there that I didn't quite ask for, but that's okay. I like that it's thinking about it. It's got all the different bits and pieces. It's documenting the phase, the UI implementation phase. It's broken it out into sub bullets, more detail. I like it. So basically, I'm ready. I'm like, okay, yeah, take this plan and integrate it into the existing plan. So I wanted to modify that Markdown file that we've been using as our master plan, and just kind of weave this in there. And I also want you to take any of the specific, highly detailed information about, the front end stuff and put it in its own file so that you can reference that file from within the plan. All right, so we are going to get started with phase 4 pretty soon here. We can see that the documentation has been generated. There's additional information in this file over here. So we're going to get started with the front end stuff, but before we do that, we're going to make sure to check in our commit our code, the changes that we've made. There are 3 new files, 2 of the services files. These are services are things that are leveraged by parts of the backend to perform a set of collecting functions together. And then we have a new API file, and then we've incorporated the blueprints for the endpoints into the initialization files of the app. So that's all done. We're going to commit that, and we are ready to start with the next step. So let's get that going. So this phase of the development actually involved quite a bit of back and forth. UI is always tricky. I find that getting the broad strokes is pretty easy, but there's a lot of gotchas in the UI stuff. You can see that the AI is managing some HTML and some JavaScript and some CSS. So there is a lot of stuff here, and I'm the one that has to keep track of how things are supposed to go and how things are supposed to work. I'm the one that decides where certain settings layouts are going to be. I'm the one that decides what I want the workflow to be like for my users. And I'm the one that picks up on things like, oh my gosh, we forgot to define system configuration schema for some of these things. And I had to have it go and read up on system settings and how that works and make sure that it wasn't falling back to setting some hard-coded defaults like it always wants to do. So there was a lot of stuff and a lot of back and forth here, but we did make some good progress, and I couldn't wait to get to the end of this so that we could actually run a few tests because I was delaying my gratification. I didn't test very much until the UI was ready for me to test with. Okay, so some time has passed. I got a little sidetracked because in order to finish this video, I wanted to set up a demo environment with some sample data for us to be able to look at so that we can run our tests. So I went ahead and did that, gave myself a little test data generator, which I tested, troubleshooted, and deployed. And so now I've got an environment set up and it's ready to go. Um, we will log in and see if everything works. So let's sign in here, and we can see a fully populated environment, and we can see some recent time entries, projects, clients, and time entries, line items, and expenses. But what we care about is this payroll. So there are no current payroll statements found. Let's go to the settings, see if actually if that worked. Oh, I do have a problem here. So I do have a specific rates set up per users. These are just randomly generated. That's why they look a little strange. We can change this rate. We can change the currency. Line item multiplier, compensation schedule. That looks good. Let's see if we can actually create a payroll statement. So we'll select a worker, Sarah Johnson. We will start her on June 1st until July June 30th. Let's see what happens. All right, so we've got bugs, and now it's time to troubleshoot. All right, so after some troubleshooting, we're back, and we're gonna. I think I fixed the bug, at least the bug that prevented us from creating a statement. So we're going to do that. We're going to once again go to Sarah. I'm going to choose June 1st and 30th. This 30th of June. That. Call that June pay. And what this does is it creates the statement. Hmm. Still having a bug. Interesting. Ah, yes, I actually know what this is. This is just a logging bug. So it actually, yeah, so it probably created a statement. Yeah, it's here. Okay. Um, so that part's working. Wow, she earned $23,000. That's really interesting. Okay, so we owe her a ton of money. Um, I guess that comes from. We need to add some filters here. So, so we've done some of this. So let's see if we can actually go with the payroll. And once we've paid, so what we're expecting here is to record a payment. And assuming that we paid the full amount, okay, okay. So we have some bugs still. All right, let's work on those bugs. Okay, so I've done a bunch of troubleshooting, and in the course of that troubleshooting, I've kind of decided that there's some things I don't like about the implementation. So I've gone and asked Claude to make some big changes. This was my request, still based on the docs. And you can tell that it's based on the docs because the way that Claude responded to my suggestion was very clued into the existing system. So I'm changing the way that we're generating these statements for payroll, trying to make it a little bit more user friendly. Created this nice little mock-up for me that I like. It's got some backend API changes that it has to make. So I basically said, yep, okay, review the docs one more time and then get to work. And so now it's working on it and it's generating my first batch of changes. So I'm going to keep working on this and I will show you what it looks like, but I'll skip all the gory parts for you so that it's too much of your time. Okay, so it's the next day, but I finished with the troubleshooting, and basically the feature is pretty much done. So we're gonna check it out here. I did some redesigning a little bit and some debugging. So we can see pretty much most of what we added. Let's just take a quick look here. Under settings, there's something called system settings. And under system settings, there are the payroll defaults. And that's where we set things like the default currency, which we can set to US dollar, default hourly rate, period start, so on and so forth, multipliers, various settings that we want to apply to any new workers that are being set up. Right, so got those settings saved. The other place where we've made some changes, we've added this payroll section, and you can see actually a few different uh, payroll statements that we've created here. There's the one from Emily where there are certain activities that um, this is all the stuff in April that she's going to get paid for. We can record a payment saying, okay, we've sent out a check. It's in US dollars. We paid her by PayPal. Reference numbers 1234. Um, and well, I've got some layout issues here. But we'll Uh, we will have to fix that. Right. I have to fix that bug. But now it shows her as paid. Um, yeah, I've got some layout bugs here, but let me just make this a little smaller so it all fits. And you can see that this has been paid. You can see that Sarah Johnson hasn't been paid yet. You can even see that I've got this custom currency set up so that if I'm paying Emily in a different currency than US dollars, then I can do that. If I'm happy with that, I can finalize this. And that is ready to pay at that point. Okay, so we've got that set up. We can create a new statement. We choose a new worker, Lisa Thompson. And what it's going to show me is all of the pay periods based on the settings, because this Lisa Thompson, if I go back to my settings here and I look at my worker profiles, and I look for Lisa Thompson, you can see that Lisa Thompson, this is her rate, this is her currency, and she gets paid weekly, right? And so the system automatically, when I go to create a new statement for Lisa Thompson, got a couple of bugs here still. Back to Lisa Thompson here. Then it automatically suggests some different pay periods that group the different billable items that she has. So if we want to pay her for that week, we select it, and that's going to take from this long list of entries, it'll pre-select all of the entries that are within that pay period. And I have the total that represents right here. And I create the statement. And now here's the draft statement for Lisa Thompson. I can open it up and see all of those time entries. There's 9 time entries, and I can see exactly where they were. Got some bugs here too. So there's a few things that we need to work on. We've also got it working in the report. So can you show me all paid payroll statements? And I can see here that I've only actually paid out one, and it is Emily Rodriguez. So, and I can export that if I want to in CSV or Excel. So all of that stuff is working. And it basically, there's some issues to iron out, but we've basically got the feature pretty much implemented. So I'm pretty happy with that. So let's go back and clean things up. Can you check the plan which was scribed in payroll feature? All right, so basically, it's a nice report. Excellent progress. Achieved this, what we successfully implemented. Is a major progress. Remaining phases. Okay, so we didn't implement the worker self-service, which is okay. I told it to put it off till later. We need a migration and deployment strategy. We need testing and validation. We need the documentation and cleanup. So what I would like to do is right now, we'll just skip to the documentation. Can you All right. So I have just prompted it to update the documentation. So the next time I start a project, I will have a fully updated set of docs, and the AI will be able to build in context. And that's the main thing that I wanted to share with you guys today, is just this method that I have of building documentation with AI, Vibe Docs, if you will, and leveraging that documentation to keep the AI on task as I progress through a project that is going to touch a lot of different parts of a relatively large code base. How to preserve context, how to preserve mission, how to preserve consistency across sessions, how to have a home base to go to bring the LLM to when it starts to go astray. Because even as we saw in this, sometimes it starts to get off track. So it's nice to have this set of documents that not only sets a clear goal, sets some clear parameters for what the AI is supposed to do, also tracks its progress, and in the end, we have something to check our result against to verify that we've achieved what we wanted. So that's my process. It works for me. I hope that it is helpful for you. If you have a different process that works for you, I would love to hear it. Please share in the comments, and I'd love to have a conversation with you guys about how that works. I hope you enjoyed the video. This is my longest video so far. I hope if you're still with me, I really appreciate it. Have a good one. Take care.